very much. I want to welcome everybody to Kigali Council for Narrations. We're very excited to have the Director General Ambassador for joining us for this interesting conversation on the relationship between Canada and Africa. But before we jump into our conversation, I want to remind everybody two things. One, I always remind this, I know sometimes it's repetitive, but it's important to remind everybody. One is we're going to be on the record for the first 20 minutes of a conversation, and when we jump into questions and answer, we'll be off the record for the last 10 minutes. And second, please, we're going to jump into the conversation with the ambassador. Please start sending us the questions as we go through our conversation, and then we'll take your questions at the end of the 20 minutes part of the conversation. All right, without taking very long, Ambassador, thank you very much for joining us. Good morning to you. Good afternoon from our side. I'm so glad to have you, and I hope you're doing well with COVID. How's Canada, by the way? Let me start with that.
Well, you know, it's been a long haul. We're hopeful now that the spring has arrived. Our vaccination rates are starting to creep out. And fortunately, we're seeing the numbers starting to decline for the first time in quite a while. So everybody's feeling a little bit more optimistic, but we probably have a few more months as well, I think, before we dare to hope that life is getting back to normal. So we're staying home for the most part. As you can see in my background here, I'm working from home most days.
Yeah, it's interesting, the whole adapting to the new challenges, working from home, technology, Zoom meetings, team meetings. I mean, I can't wait to see the books people write about. But let's jump into our conversation. I'm very interested to a little bit here about, you know, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, became the first Canadian Prime Minister to visit, to speak at Africa Union Summit in Ethiopia last year. And you've been the High Commission Ambassador to Africa, so you understand a little bit the dynamic between Africa and Canada. You know, how's Canada looking to redefine the relationship with Africa?
You know, I think the relationship has been evolving for many years, but definitely I think never before have I seen such a strong understanding at the highest levels of Africa's importance on the world stage as a region, and the importance of the relationships with each of the 54 countries on the continent, and what a critical role they are playing, I think, to shape the international community that we're living in. You know, we're very much you know, working closely with African countries at the UN, at the Commonwealth, at La Francophonie, and it's so clear to me that you know, Canada trying to advance its own objectives and arguing for a strong multilateral system really relies on having shared understanding and shared objectives with the countries right across the African region. So I think that's one critical part there. I think secondly, you know, our political leaders have been listening closely to their counterparts in Africa, and are very much understanding that in most countries there's a strong desire to you know, move away from a relationship that was often you know, largely focused on development assistance, and looking far more at how do we do more in terms of trade and investment to strengthen the economies of Canada and its partners in Africa as a more sustainable way to generate revenues domestically, so there's less reliance on development assistance, which makes all the sense in the world. So I think you'll see that there's a lot more attention to that side of things in our conversations going forward. Definitely, though, the multilateral side of things, I think, is really important. We've been through a really challenging few years, I think, and there was a sense that in some quarters internationally, there's a tendency to move back into an older framework where might makes right, and the biggest countries might be able to impose you know, their terms on others. And you know, I think Canada is a fairly important country, but we're still you know, a medium-sized country in terms of population, and we rely on a strong multilateral system, and we think in that we have very common interests with many countries in Africa, if not most countries in Africa, and in that sense we've got that to bring us together. there's no question there's a number of global challenges that we're also working to address, whether it's COVID-19, whether it's looking to advance peace and security globally, not just within Africa, but those linkages are clear. Trade, I think the emergence of the African continental free trade area is something that we're very excited about. I think we're very pleased to say that we helped contribute to a lot of the analysis that went into creating the foundation for that work, working through the Africa Trade Policy Center. And we see that as something that's definitely good for Africa in terms of promoting intra-African trade, but we see that ultimately benefiting countries like Canada who are looking to engage more at a commercial level with Africa. The last thing I'd mention is just, when Prime Minister Trudeau was there last year, one of the key commitments was to hold the first ever Canada-African Union high-level consultation. And COVID's delayed that a bit, but it's very much in the planning, and we're very eager to see that happen as well.
Okay. So I want to come back to a little bit, few things to touch on trade, the international system, but just to be specific, what are your priorities on the continent for 2021 or 2020 moving forward?
It's an excellent question. There's quite a few of them. I would say we do take a comprehensive approach, I think, in terms of our relationships on the continent. And as I say, that happens both in multilateral ways in terms of engagement with key institutions like the African Union, but also bilaterally with the many countries in Africa. I think you'll see our priorities are really rooted in our interests and in our values. And we think in both fronts, we often have very shared interests with countries in Africa, as well as shared values. But these are the things that drive it. So, to give an example, I think promoting and encouraging democracy on the continent is important to us. I think the last few years have shown us that we cannot assume that everybody agrees that democracy is a desirable approach to governing affairs. And there's no one country or one region that can sort of say, oh, yes, this is all a done deal. Like it's something we have to keep reinvesting in and reconsidering. And so I think we as a nation still see democracy as very much a model that we believe in, and that we want to encourage movement toward democracy globally, including in Africa. Definitely, it's still a priority, I think, to promote peace and security and stability globally, but certainly in Africa, it's very much a concern. We're quite conscious that Africa, unfortunately, is still over 50% of the agenda for the UN Security Council. So it's something we know is very much, one of the major challenges that African countries are facing collectively, and the silencing the guns initiative under the African Union was a key way to demonstrate that. Beyond that, though, we're very excited about promoting inclusive and green growth. So in that sense, we do really think that there's opportunities to chart a more sustainable economic growth that's more sustainable and more equitable. And that's something that we're keen to work on with our African partners, including in areas such as renewable energy. Definitely poverty reduction is still there. We're conscious that the Sustainable Development Goals remain a challenge to meet in many of our partner countries. And so that's definitely going to be a priority for us. And within that, always trying to look at a focus on reaching the poorest and most vulnerable groups. I mentioned trade and investment. I think that's important for us. It's important in terms of diversification. You're probably aware that I think it's over 70% of our trade is with the United States, and we appreciate that. It's important, but I think it's important to diversify that as well. And so I think that's a shared interest, and in Africa as well. I think that that's something where we're on the same page. Definitely in the recovery from COVID-19. I mean, we're still dealing with the thick of COVID-19, and I'm very conscious that vaccination rates remain very low in much of the continent, and Rwanda is doing better than most, and so I congratulate you on that. I think in terms of the management of the pandemic has been exemplary in Rwanda compared to so many other countries, and we've learned from it as well. But I think it's going to be a long process. It could take years before we are beyond the repercussions, and I think a lot of those will be on the economic front in terms of livelihoods, in terms of economic activity. So that will be a priority, I think, for a while for us. I think health has been and will continue to be a priority, including sexual and reproductive health. This will be something that will be important, I think, for a long time, ensuring healthy populations, because there's so little you can do if you're not healthy. And so we've invested heavily over the last decades in that area, and that won't go away, I think. Human rights, I think, is also a key area. I mentioned sexual reproductive health, but certainly human rights more broadly is still a priority for us in Canada. We're still grappling today with issues around human rights, and no doubt you've heard about ongoing difficult challenges in terms of relationships with First Nations and Indigenous communities in Canada. But we do feel that that is part of building the society that we want to live in, and so that's one of our core values that we will continue to promote around the world, not just in Africa. So those, I think, would be the key ones I would flag. There's probably more that I could mention, but those are some top of mind ones.
So I just a little bit want to touch about trade. You mentioned a little bit trade. I mean, it's becoming the center of foreign policy in many countries. And what are your trade goals in Africa? One or two things. And second is, do you have any trade agreement with countries on the continent, like the one you have with NAFTA or the new score USA, I mean, between Canada and America? Do you have any sort of that kind of thing with any country in Africa, or is this something part of discussion within Africa Union?
I think we're very much committed to increasing trade and investment in Africa. Having participated and listened to so many conversations with African leaders over the last 20 years, it's the top topic that comes up over and over again. And so we take that seriously. We take it to heart. And we also see it as something that's also, of interest to us and a benefit to Canadians as well. And so that's something we're pursuing. The question of how to do it is often, the harder question. How do we move the ball forward in that sense? That's one of the reasons why, we think, we have been investing heavily into some of laying the frameworks or groundwork in Africa. We were a strong supporter historically to establishing the African Continental Free Trade Area through our support to the African Trade Policy Center. Again, recognizing that that's not really about trade with Canada, it's about trade between countries in Africa, but it does, I think, help to stimulate economic growth. And so the larger the economic activity in Africa, the more potential opportunities there are for Canadian companies who might get active on the continent. But also the idea of having, stable, predictable, trade rules and so on will also help a Canadian company who may establish itself somewhere on the continent and use that as kind of a jumping off point to engage in trade and investment, in other countries as well. So in that sense, I think, the progress that we're seeing on that front is very encouraging over the longer term. In terms of agreements, we do have 8 foreign investment protection and promotion agreements, what we call FIPAs. That's not a lot, but I'm glad to say that our Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade, Minister Ng, has recently announced a new model for our FIPA agreements after an extensive review and looking at how they should be designed and how they should work. I think the new version or the new kind of template that we'll be working with helps to ensure that benefits of the trade and investment are more widely shared, both in Canada and in the countries that we're partnering with on that front. So I'm expecting to see new FIPA agreements being signed, and now that we have that review has been completed and we have a new kind of model going forward. We're also going to continue providing support to the Africa Trade Policy Center, which is based at the UN Economic Commission for Africa, as they try to, support the member countries to implement, the AFCTA across the continent. And so that's something we'll keep working on. Beyond that, I don't think we see it being an immediate priority to have a free trade agreement directly with African countries. I don't think we're there yet. It's certainly something we're open to in the longer term. I think we feel that there's still a lot to do just in terms of building that base that we can build on and refine over time. But again, we also have a trade commissioner service. So we have people who are dedicated to supporting Canadian companies to partner with African companies right across the continent. And so they're sort of leading the charge in terms of helping to identify kind of the supply and the demand, the needs and the potential Canadian responses. So that's an important part of our service abroad.
Yeah, so I want to come back to COVID, but before we talk about COVID, you just mentioned a little bit the Canadian companies. So I'm very much interested, and I'm sure the Canadian companies on this webinar, they will ask the same questions. What are investment opportunities for Canadian private sector in Africa? And I want to ask about what does the new African Continental Free Trade Agreement means for them? And it's a very historical agreement as well, and that start functioning January. What does that mean for Canadian companies investing in Africa?
So we're still, I think, working on both fronts. I must say, I think there's some Canadian companies who have shown a lot of boldness and entrepreneurialism in terms of expanding their operations into Africa. Many others are less familiar with Africa, and I think we've got some ways to go to help them realize the potential that's there and the benefits that can be had by partnering with African companies. Some of the key sectors, so natural resource development, certainly mining has been in the investment side a key area, but I think that we'll see diversification going forward. There's a lot of interest in the area of renewable energy and also in information and communications technology, to name just a couple. Often we're not necessarily the main player in terms of some of the big projects that happen, but Canadian companies are often working in terms of providing expertise on services, assessments, evaluations, feasibility studies, that sort of thing. So those are some of the areas where we begin, but it tends to be country by country because it does get down into the granularity. And in terms of trade and investment, we as government are very much in a supportive role. We're not in the lead role. It's really the companies that have to decide what they want to do, and we try to provide a supporting framework. And as I mentioned with the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, again, I think it's the main benefits there for us is in terms of just creating a clear framework for trade within Africa that would allow Canadian companies to perhaps establish themselves one location, but then use that as a base for expanding activities to other countries on the continent.
So coming back to the current pandemic crisis, how's the Canadian government supporting Africa when it comes with COVID?
I think it's been one of probably the top priority that we've had internationally. As you've probably seen, it's really dominated both our domestic and our foreign policy on many fronts over the last year plus, as appropriately so. And I think it's one of the classic examples that helps to show why we put so much stake on having a strong multilateral system, because this was for us a classic example of where you're dealing with a challenge that doesn't recognize borders, right? That cannot be solved any one place. and that will not be solved until it's solved everywhere, right? The pandemic's not going to be over until it's over everywhere, and we're very conscious of that. So we've been, working largely through international mechanisms, such as the access to COVID-19 tools accelerator. So that Act 19, there's been I think it's about $865 million put into that. But that's only part of a larger response. I think it's been about $1.6 billion that Canada has invested into the global response to COVID-19. A really important part of that, I think, has been helping to develop systems for safe production and distribution of safe and effective COVID-19 tests and the treatments, and then the vaccines themselves. And so as part of the vaccines part, there's big contributions to COVAX, which Canada was one of the early supporters of, and has helped to lead that internationally since about this time last year, which key focus is helping to ensure equitable access to vaccines, including in middle and low income countries. So I think there's 92 middle and low income countries that will be able to access vaccines through that mechanism. So our main contributions have been through these multilateral mechanisms, again with this idea that the need is everywhere, and it's only when you have sort of these multilateral mechanisms that you could try to ensure that nobody's missing out because they're not a big enough country to have their voice heard, or they don't have the closer relationships and so on. We got a long ways to go, but that's been the main focus of our response, including to Africa.
Yes. So my last question before we jump into questions answered from the audience, High Commission leadership in Chatham as High Commission to Rwanda and Kenya this year. When is the new High Commission for Rwanda, the Canadian High Commission for Rwanda, coming? And who's that, by the way?
Well, I'd love to be able to give you an answer. The honest truth is I don't know for sure, because it's a process that's kept very closely guarded. All I can say is it's well advanced. I'm not expecting any significant delays. Our previous High Commissioner, as you may have heard, was appointed to be our new ambassador to Israel. So a very important, prestigious role. So I think that gives some sense of how important her previous role in Nairobi was, and from Nairobi, of course, she covered Rwanda, she covered Uganda, Burundi as well, and Somalia. So of course the UN system, so UNEP and UN Habitat based in Nairobi. So it's a very big job. It's one of our largest missions worldwide. But I understand the process for selection and proving and vetting and so on is well advanced. So I'm not expecting any delays on that front, but I can't give you a date or a name right now.
We have a good candidate for Francois in Kigali. I think it would be very great, but that's different. That's a different. But anyway, we're very happy to jump into our questions. We got off the record. Please, as not because that's question would be good. The first question would be great.
People like the mighty Popo.
Yeah. Ambassador, we run out of time as always, but thank you very much for your time and for engaging us in a very interesting conversation. And it's always good to have you here. And we hope to see you in Rwanda, and we'll be very glad to host you for in-person conversation after COVID. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's been a pleasure being with you here, and I do look forward to coming to Rwanda again soon, I hope, and perhaps in the context of the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting once it's rescheduled.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. It's so good to have everybody. And Francois, I see the head of the mission in Kigali. Thank you for joining us, Francois, also. And everybody have a wonderful evening. And have a good day, Ambassador.
Thank you. Bye-bye now.